All right, let's talk about careers. Some people sit in an office, some people climb mountains, and some people, bless their slightly unhinged hearts, decide their best professional move is to walk into a cage full of giant toothy cats. We're talking about lion tamers. It's a job description that sounds like it was written on a dare. Imagine the job interview. So tell me about a time you handled a difficult situation. Well, there was this 500-pound male lion named Scarface who decided my head looked like a particularly juicy steak. It's a world built on a foundation of questionable judgment and an incredible amount of what can only be described as intestinal fortitude. You need a special kind of grit to look a predator in the eye and say, "You're going to jump through this flaming hoop because I said so." Out in the wild, survival is about understanding nature, respecting it, and knowing your place. You don't poke a sleeping bear, and you certainly don't try to make a grumpy lion do a pirouette. But the circus ring is a different kind of wilderness, a man-made jungle of sequins and sawdust. Here, the rules are flipped upside down. The whole point is to dominate nature, to bend its will for the roaring approval of a crowd munching on popcorn. It's a bizarre spectacle, a dance with death dressed up in a sparkly costume. The tools of the trade aren't a compass and a good knife. They're a whip, a chair, and an iron will that borders on the insane. It's a high-stakes game where the price of failure is getting mauled. The psychology behind wanting to become a lion tamer is fascinating. Is it a thirst for adrenaline, a deep-seated need to conquer the unconquerable? Or maybe they just really like cats and have a terrible sense of scale. Whatever the reason, these performers willingly stepped into the arena day after day, knowing that their co-stars were genetically programmed to see them as a potential meal. They relied on a mix of bravado, animal psychology, and, let's be honest, a good deal of luck. Each show was a roll of the dice, a gamble that the big cats would choose to obey rather than follow their most basic primal instincts. It's a profession that's equal parts courage and complete madness. Think about the sheer audacity of it all. You're facing an animal that can run faster than an Olympic sprinter, bite with enough force to crush bone, and has claws like curved daggers. Your survival kit? A flimsy wooden chair and a cracking whip. In the wild, I'd want a Land Rover and a very long lens. But these folks, they wanted to get up close and personal. They wanted to put their head in the lion's mouth, literally. It's a testament to the strange and wonderful and often gruesome places human ambition can take us. This isn't just a history of a circus act, it's a history of humanity's strange, often brutal relationship with the animal kingdom. So where did this bonkers idea come from? You might think it started under a striped circus tent, but the roots go much deeper and darker. We have to go all the way back to ancient Rome. The Romans were famous for their spectacular and often bloody entertainment. In the Colosseum, they pitted men against beasts in fights to the death. But some clever individuals figured out there was another way. Instead of just killing the animals, they could train them. The first recorded lion tamer was a man named George of Antioch. Around the 1st century AD, he figured out that he could make lions and leopards do his bidding. His secret, not kindness but cruelty. He used hot irons to teach the animals that disobedience meant searing pain. It was brutal, but it worked. This grim tradition of animal performance continued in various forms for centuries, but the modern circus lion tamer, as we know him, really burst onto the scene in the early 19th century. The credit, or perhaps the blame, goes to a Frenchman named Henri Martin. In 1819, Martin decided to take a different approach. He studied his lions, learned their behaviors, and opted for a less overtly violent method. He wanted to create the illusion of a bond, of a man who had truly conquered the king of beasts through sheer force of will. He was the first to enter a cage with a big cat during a live performance, creating a sensation across Europe. He set the template for the classic tamer, the dramatic costume, the commanding presence, and the nail-biting tension. Following Martin, an American named Isaac A. Van Amberg took the act to a whole new level of showmanship and, frankly, insanity. Van Amber, who became a superstar in the 1830s, was known as the Lion King. He wasn't content just to be in the cage. He needed to be the master. He would act out biblical scenes like Daniel in the lion's den for cheering crowds. His signature move was to smear his arms and face with blood and then lie down among his lions and tigers, creating a horrifying and thrilling tableau. He was the one who really perfected the art of making the audience believe he had a mystical power over these deadly predators, all while cultivating a reputation for extreme cruelty behind the scenes. The tools of the trade were established during this era. The whip wasn't just for show. The sharp crack was used to startle the animal and assert dominance. The chair was a brilliant piece of psychological warfare. When a tamer held a chair in front of him, the four legs confused the lion. A lion's brain is wired to focus on a single target, but the four chair legs presented too many points of interest, causing the animal to hesitate. And the pistol, often loaded with blanks, was the ultimate emergency button, creating a loud bang to break up a fight or stop an attack. These weren't tools of friendship, they were instruments of control, born in an age of spectacle and domination. Let's dig into the dirty secrets, the stuff they didn't put on the posters. The taming process was often a brutal, spirit-breaking affair. The goal wasn't to build a relationship of trust, it was to instill a deep-seated fear. Trainers would isolate a young lion or tiger, often when it was just a cub, and begin a process called breaking. This involved asserting absolute dominance through intimidation and physical punishment. They believed that to control the animal in the ring, you first had to convince it that you were the scariest thing it would ever encounter. It was a battle of wills, and the human was determined to win at any cost, using methods that were nothing short of torture. One of the most common and horrific techniques was declawing. This wasn't a simple trim, it was the surgical amputation of the last bone of each toe. Imagine having the tips of your fingers cut off. For a cat, whose claws are essential for balance, gripping, and defense, it was a crippling and painful procedure. It left them permanently maimed and vulnerable. Another brutal practice was the use of spiked collars and goads, sharp metal prods hidden from the audience's view. A trainer could deliver a sharp, painful jab to a sensitive area like the neck or mouth to force compliance, all while smiling and bowing to the cheering crowd. The illusion was one of effortless command. The reality was pain-based obedience. Food and water deprivation were also standard tools in the Tamers' arsenal. A hungry animal is a more compliant animal. Trainers would withhold meals to make the cats more focused on the food rewards they would receive for performing a trick correctly. This kept the animals in a constant state of stress and desperation, making them easier to control. The public saw a well-fed, majestic beast performing incredible feats. Backstage, that same animal was likely weak from hunger, its spirit crushed by a relentless regimen of fear and deprivation. The glittering costumes and dramatic music hid a very ugly truth about what it took to make a wild animal perform on cue. The psychological toll on these animals was immense. Big cats are intelligent, complex creatures. Being forced into a life of confinement and repetitive, unnatural performances led to a condition known as zoochosis. This is a form of neurosis seen in captive animals, manifesting as repetitive behaviors like pacing, head bobbing, or self-mutilation. The majestic lions and tigers that thrilled audiences were often deeply disturbed, living in a state of perpetual anxiety. The roar that sounded so mighty to the crowd might have been a cry of distress. The entire industry was built on breaking an animal's wild spirit, leaving a shell of a creature that would do tricks for a scrap of meat. When you spend your days poking a 500-pound predator with a stick, things are occasionally going to go wrong. It's simple math. The history of lion taming is littered with stories of performers who learned this lesson the hard way. One of the most infamous early examples is Thomas McCarthy. In 1872, in Bolton, England, McCarthy was performing his act with a group of lions. He was known as Massati the Lion Tamer. During the show, a lion named Tyrant attacked him, and then the other lions joined in. The audience at first thought it was part of the act. They cheered as McCarthy was dragged around the cage. It wasn't until they saw the blood that the horrific reality set in. By the time anyone could intervene, it was too late. McCarthy was torn to pieces in front of a packed house. This wasn't a one-off event, it was a known occupational hazard. Every tamer had scars, and every tamer had a story about a close call. The animals they worked with were not domesticated pets, they were wild animals, and their instincts could take over in a split second. A sudden noise, a flash of light, or a perceived moment of weakness from the tamer could be all it took to trigger an attack. The relationship between tamer and cat was a tightrope walk over a canyon of pure instinct. One wrong step, one moment of hesitation, and the illusion of control would be shattered by claws and teeth. The crowd came for the thrill, but the thrill was real because the danger was always present. Another chilling story is that of Captain Jack Bonavita. In 1904, he was a star performer at Bostock's Carnival on Coney Island. His signature move was his incredible bond with his 27 lions. But that bond snapped one day. During a performance, a lion named Baltimore pounced, sinking its teeth into Bonavita's arm. Other lions joined the fray, and for several terrifying minutes, Bonavita fought for his life. He managed to escape the cage, but his arm was so badly mangled that it had to be amputated. He survived, but his career as a hands-on tamer was over. It was a brutal reminder that no amount of training or supposed affection could ever fully erase the wild nature of these animals. These incidents highlight a fundamental truth. You can't tame a lion. You can only intimidate it into temporary submission. The animals were often living in a state of high stress, and eventually that stress would boil over. Performers who got mauled or killed weren't necessarily bad at their jobs. They were just on the losing end of a gamble they took every time they stepped into the cage. The public loved the narrative of man conquering beast, but nature has a way of reminding us who is really in charge. For every successful trick, there was the ever-present shadow of an attack, a gruesome end to the entertainment. Now, let's talk about, one of the toughest people to ever step into a cage, Mabel Stark. She wasn't just one of the few female tiger tamers, she was honestly one of the greatest of all time. In an era completely dominated by men, Mabel carved out a legendary career starting in the 1910s. She wasn't a big, burly man who relied on brute force. Instead, she developed a unique style that combined affection with firm discipline, often wrestling and rolling around with her tigers in a way that left audiences absolutely breathless. She preferred tigers to lions, claiming they were more intelligent and trustworthy, which, is a bit like saying a great white shark is more trustworthy than a saltwater crocodile. Mabel's life was a testament to her incredible resilience. She was mauled so many times, it's a miracle she kept going back. Her body was a roadmap of her career, covered in scars from dozens of attacks. In 1928, she was nearly killed by a tiger named Raja, who grabbed her by the leg and dragged her around the ring. Her leg was shredded, but after a long recovery, she was right back in the cage. Another time, a tiger bit clean through her arm. She was scalped, she had her shoulder dislocated, and she was bitten and clawed more times than anyone could count. Each time, she would stitch herself up and get back to work. She had a grit that was honestly simply unbelievable. Her most famous and nearly fatal accident happened in 1950 at the Jungleland USA theme park in California. During a performance, one of her tigers, Sheba, missed a jump and, in a moment of confusion and panic, attacked her. 2 other tigers joined in. Mabel was severely injured, suffering a severed artery in her arm and deep wounds all over her body. She almost bled to death in the sawdust of the arena. It was a horrifying incident that made headlines everywhere. Yet, even after this near-death experience, her primary concern was for the tigers, begging the park staff not to harm them. Her dedication to her animals, even the ones that tried to kill her, was absolute. Mabel Stark's story is a complicated one. On one hand, she was a pioneer who broke gender barriers and displayed a level of courage that is, hard to comprehend. She truly seemed to love her tigers, and many of her methods were seen as more humane than those of her male counterparts. On the other hand, she was still part of a cruel industry that exploited wild animals for entertainment. Her life ended tragically in 1968 after being fired from her job at Jungleland. She took her own life. She couldn't bear to be without her tigers. Her story is a powerful and ultimately sad look at the intense, dangerous and all-consuming world of the big cat tamer. If there was a rock star of the lion-taming world, it was Gunther Gebel-Williams. With his blonde hair, charismatic smile and dazzling costumes, he was the face of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus for 3 decades. He arrived in America from Germany in 1968 and became an instant sensation. Gunther's style was, different. He presented his act not as a battle of man versus beast, but as a beautiful partnership. He used verbal commands and subtle cues from his whip, creating an image of harmony and mutual respect. He would ride elephants, train leopards to jump over tigers, and create pyramids of animals that seemed to, defy gravity. The public absolutely adored him, but behind the sparkling veneer, the job was just as dangerous. Gunther's gentle approach didn't make the animals any less wild. He just had a masterful way of hiding the danger. He believed in what he called loving domination. He commanded respect, and the animals knew who was boss, but he projected an aura of playfulness and affection. He would kiss his tigers and whisper in their ears, making the audience believe they were just oversized house cats. He was a master illusionist, and his greatest trick was making people forget they were watching a man in a cage with a dozen killers. He rarely had a serious public accident, which only added to his mystique. However, the close calls were constant. In a 1981 television special, a panther suddenly latched onto his arm during a rehearsal. With cameras rolling, Gunther calmly pried the animal's jaws open and continued the practice session as if nothing had happened. Though he was bleeding, he knew that any sign of fear or pain would undermine his authority forever. He later admitted that he was bitten or clawed, on average, once a week. He just became an expert at hiding the injuries and never letting the audience or the other animals see him flinch. His body, like Mabel Stark's, was covered in the small scars that were the price of his profession. Gunther Gebel-Williams retired in 1998, having performed over 12,000 shows without ever missing one due to injury. His career marked both the peak and the beginning of the end for the Big Cat Act. He was so good, so charismatic, that he made the brutal business seem beautiful. But even he couldn't stop the changing tide of public opinion. People were becoming more aware of the ethical issues surrounding animal performance. Gunther was the last of the great superstars, a symbol of a bygone era. He passed away from cancer in 2001, but his legacy as the ultimate circus showman, a man who danced with tigers and made it look easy, endures. In the age of television and video, the hidden dangers of lion taming were suddenly broadcast into living rooms around the world. What was once just a story in a newspaper became a visceral, terrifying reality. One of the most infamous televised attacks involved the magic duo Siegfried and Roy. On October 3, 2003, during a sold-out show at the Mirage in Las Vegas, Roy Horn was on stage with a white tiger named Manticore. For reasons still debated, the tiger suddenly became aggressive, biting Roy's arm. When Roy tried to bat the tiger away with his microphone, Manticore lunged, biting his neck and dragging him off stage like a rag doll. The entire incident happened in front of a horrified live audience. The attack severed Roy's spine, caused massive blood loss, and left him partially paralyzed. It was a shocking end to one of the most successful shows in Las Vegas history. The official story from the duo was that the tiger was trying to protect Roy after he suffered a stroke on stage, dragging him to safety. But many animal experts and former employees disagree, believing it was a straightforward attack triggered by a mistake or confusion. Whatever the cause, the moment Roy was dragged off stage became a terrifying, iconic image, a brutal reminder of the unpredictable nature of these animals. Another harrowing moment was captured on film during a performance by a lesser-known tamer in Spain. The video, which went viral online, shows the tamer going through his routine with a large lion. Everything seems fine until in a flash the lion grabs the tamer's leg. The man falls to the ground and the lion begins to drag him around the small circus ring. Assistants rush in with sticks and fire extinguishers, desperately trying to distract the lion. The footage is chaotic and terrifying, showing the sheer power of the animal and the helplessness of the man. He was eventually rescued but suffered serious injuries. It's a raw, unglamorous look at what happens when the show goes wrong. These recorded incidents did immense damage to the public perception of animal acts. It was one thing to hear about an accident from the 1800s, it was another to see it happen in graphic detail on the evening news or on YouTube. The videos stripped away the magic and the mystique, exposing the raw, brutal danger underneath. They made it impossible to ignore the fact that these were not willing performers, but captive wild animals capable of lethal violence. The footage of Roy Horn being carried in a tiger's mouth became a powerful symbol for animal rights activists, fueling the movement to ban big cat acts for good. The camera, in many ways, was the final nail in the coffin for the traditional lion tamer. The world has changed. The sight of a man in a spangled suit cracking a whip at a tiger just doesn't sit right with most people anymore. The decline of the lion tamer act wasn't caused by one single thing, but by a slow, powerful shift in our collective conscience. For decades, animal welfare groups had been campaigning against the use of animals in circuses. They exposed the brutal training methods, the cramped living conditions, and the psychological damage inflicted on the animals. Their message began to resonate with a public that was becoming more educated about and sensitive to animal rights. The glamour of the circus began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Legal pressure also played a huge role. Cities, states, and even entire countries began passing laws banning or severely restricting the use of wild animals in traveling shows. It became a logistical nightmare for circuses to operate. They faced protests in every town they visited and a mountain of legal red tape. The costs of ensuring these dangerous acts skyrocketed. The business model that had sustained the circus for over a century was crumbling. In 2017, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, the greatest show on earth, held its final performance, citing declining ticket sales and high operating costs, both directly linked to the controversy over its animal acts. It was a symbolic end to an era. The science of animal behavior also caught up with the spectacle. We now understand so much more about the complex social structures and needs of animals like lions and tigers. We know that forcing them to perform unnatural tricks in a loud, stressful environment is inherently cruel. Documentaries like Blackfish, which exposed the dark side of keeping orcas in captivity, had a ripple effect, making people question all forms of animal entertainment. The idea of a tamer having a special bond with his animals was replaced by the scientific understanding that this was a relationship based on dominance and fear, not friendship. The magic was gone, and only the uncomfortable reality remained. So the lion tamer has become a relic of the past, a figure that belongs in old photographs and history books. Modern circuses, like Cirque du Soleil, have proven that you can still create a spectacular, breathtaking show using only human performers. They replace the animal cage with incredible acrobatics, artistry, and human skill. The roar of the crowd is just as loud, but it's no longer at the expense of an animal's well-being. The story of the lion tamer is a fascinating chapter in our history, but it's one we've thankfully closed. It's a reminder of how our relationship with the natural world has evolved from one of conquest to one of, hopefully, greater respect and understanding. We've been on quite a journey, haven't we? From the blood-soaked sands of the Roman Colosseum to the glittering lights of Las Vegas. We've seen the unbelievable courage of performers like Mabel Stark and the masterful showmanship of Gunther Gable-Williams. We've also peeled back the curtain to look at the brutal training methods, the tragic accidents, and the deep psychological toll these acts took on the animals. It's a history that is equal parts thrilling, horrifying, and just plain bizarre. It's a story of human audacity and our long, complicated, and often cruel relationship with the wild. It's a world that feels a million miles away from our modern sensibilities. On one hand, you can't help but feel a strange sense of admiration for the sheer nerve of these individuals. To willingly walk into a cage with a dozen apex predators requires a type of bravery that most of us can barely imagine. They were pioneers of a strange and dangerous art form, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. They created moments of spectacle and wonder that captivated audiences for generations. They were superstars, daredevils, and survivors who literally gamble with their lives every single day for the roar of the crowd and the thrill of the performance. It's a level of commitment to a job that is, in its own way, truly remarkable. But on the other hand, it's impossible to ignore the ethical cost. The entire profession was built on the suffering of intelligent, majestic animals. They were stolen from the wild or bred in captivity, their spirits broken and their bodies often maimed, all for the sake of human entertainment. They lived lives of confinement and stress, a far cry from the freedom of their natural habitats. The taming was a lie, it was domination. The bond was an illusion, it was fear. As our understanding of animal welfare has grown, the image of the lion tamer has shifted from a heroic figure to a symbol of animal cruelty. So I have to ask you, what do you think? When you look back at the wild world of the lion tamers, what do you see? Are they courageous heroes of a bygone era, or are they villains in a dark chapter of entertainment history? Is there room for nuance, or is it a simple case of right and wrong? The debate is a fascinating one, and it says a lot about how our values have changed over time. I'd love to hear your take on it. Drop a comment below and let me know your verdict on this bizarre and gruesome profession. Was it a spectacle worth the price?